Are the Supreme Court justices unethical? For more than 3 hours today, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing to get to the bottom of the Supreme Court's ethics rules and whether or not they should be changed. And yes, I watched the entire hearing. This is what you need to know. The facts are this. The Supreme Court of the United States does not have a formal binding code of ethics. It's more like a guideline that justices decide on for themselves. The court does not have an internal ethics department where justices can go if they have questions about ethics. It does not have explicit disclosure rules specifically for travel, and it has not disclosed publicly the rules for how and why justices recuse themselves from cases where there are conflicts of interest. The last fact you need to understand is Chief Justice John Roberts refused to testify at today's hearing and refused to send any other justice in his place. All 9 Supreme Court justices signed a letter that basically says, we got this. We can police ourselves and Congress needs to stay out of it. The reality is the Supreme Court justices are not bound to the same standards as the executive and legislative branch of the United States government. And they say they aren't even subject to the same ethical standards as lower federal court judges. So does Congress have the power to impose stricter ethics rules, or should the court continue to police itself? Well, it all comes down to 2 constitutional ideas: separation of powers and checks and balances.
Separation of powers is, of course, a constitutional principle, but checks and balances is equally important. And the role of the Congress is to establish the Supreme Court. It's not just permitted, it's required. Yes, the framers were very clear that there would be partial control of each branch over the other because no one should be unaccountable, and ambition must counteract ambition, as James Madison put it.
The other side sees it differently.
Ordering the justices to adopt a code of conduct defends the separation of powers. The bill intrudes upon the core function of a coordinate and co-equal branch of government. It is the Supreme Court, not the Congress, that has the prerogative under our constitutional structure to decide whether to adopt a code of conduct that governs themselves.
The fact is, public confidence in the Supreme Court is eroding. And like everything in Congress, this is turning into a political issue. Democrats have been raising this issue for more than a decade, saying this is about, at the very least, encouraging and at the most, mandating the court take up some sort of ethics reform.
What is so hard for our Supreme Court to adopt a code of ethics? It could have done so 11 years ago, 10 years ago when our chairman first brought up the subject. So what is so hard for them to adopt a code that every other court has to abide by? You see, that's what we're facing today. And frankly, I can see why the public has severe questions about the confidence that they have in our Supreme Court, which seems to hold itself above any other court and any of the rest of us in terms of their ethical behavior.
But Republicans see any attempt, at least right now, to force any kind of ethics on the Supreme Court as an attack.
Senate Democrats and their lapdogs in the media are engaged in a twofold political campaign. Number one, to delegitimize the Supreme Court of the United States because they are angry that there are a majority of constitutionalists on the court. But number 2, very directly, this is a political campaign designed to smear Justice Clarence Thomas.
Now, legislation that would impose stricter ethics codes for the Supreme Court is moving through Congress, but whether it actually goes anywhere is still up for debate.